Well, hey everyone, welcome back. We are working through Matthew Kelly's book called The Rhythm of Life, and we're going to do the second half of part six. And this is such a fascinating part of his book. Really encourage you to pick this up. I actually was just out to lunch with somebody in between doing these two videos, and he just happened to say, "Oh, yeah, I've been reading through The Rhythm of Life," which was awesome. And he was telling me how much he was enjoying it. So I encourage you to pick this book up, The Rhythm of Life by Matthew Kelly. And right now we're going to take a look at principles 6 through 10 on his principles for success. So in principle number, you might remember, let me just review for a second. We had the knowledge principle, and then the dream principle, then vision, having a vision for your life, which he defines really as how are you going to work this out? A life principle, a thought principle, and now we're on number 6 with the dedication principle. These chapters 6 through 10 are relatively short. In this one, it's just as it sounds. He's basically just calling us to um, identify what you're committed to and then be dedicated to it. It's like nobody who's achieved a lot has not been dedicated to it. They've all been dedicated to it. And he says, he gives examples, various ones, Beethoven, Michelangelo. He says the legends, heroes, and leaders, champions, and saints who fill our history books loved what they did. People of this caliber dedicate their whole being to their pursuits. And then he asks us this humbling question: what are you willing to dedicate yourself to completely? What are you willing to throw your whole energy into? What are you willing to pursue wholeheartedly? So if you're talking to a stranger and for whatever reason they ask you that question, what are you willing to throw yourself at completely, or what have you dedicated your life to? How would you respond? And as you might imagine, in his consistent way, he says, dedicate yourself to choosing the best version of yourself in every choice that you make. He says, this is the dedication principle. And he reminds us that in order to love what we do, we must do what we love. All right, so that takes us to principle number 7, the belief principle. So remember, I've abbreviated the principles, but maybe to help you remember: know, dream, vision, life, thought, dedication, and then number 7, the belief principle. Which this is interesting because he talks about his faith in Christ, and in this particular principle, he says, without faith, we would be driven to the depths of despair. And he says, everybody has some kind of faith, which is true. And he encourages us, as the scriptures do, though the scriptures assume there's a God, and the scriptures invite us into that relationship with God. And he says, you are here for some reason. You've been born to live this one life. And so embrace that concept. He quotes Albert Einstein, interestingly, saying, there are two ways to live life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. And the choice is yours. So this is the belief principle. Believe that you were created for a purpose and everything happens for a reason. I think of New Testament verses like Romans 8:28. God does all things for good to those who trust him, love him, and are called according to his purposes. And Philippians 1:6, where the Apostle Paul says that he is sure that the God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Just great reminder. Jesus told us, my Father is always at work. Let's live with the conviction that God is at work in your life. He's given you particular gifts, as we looked at in the last video. He does have a best version of you, and he's going to bring that good work to completion. So that is the belief principle number 7. Remember, these are all principles that he's found in The people who have been successful have been those who have these principles in his experience. Principle 8 is the people principle. This one basically says we can't do it alone. I think I just read in here, or I saw it somewhere else. If you want to go somewhere fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the scriptures encourage us to stay connected, certainly to other believers, people who are moving in the same direction we are. Stay involved in the lives of people. And Matthew Kelly says, without the help of others, you will never make the journey. It is simply a part of the divine plan that we make the journey together, which I fully embrace. It's part of Celebrate Recovery. We cannot do this alone. And he says, I've discovered that the key to an abundant spiritual life is personal relationship, which of course is the language we use because it's the language used in the scriptures, having a relationship with the God of the universe. That's what he's made us for. Life is relationship. And so he encourages us to cherish people along the way, recognizing that everyone is on a different spiritual path, or different places on their spiritual path. And so we need to cherish and recognize that in respecting people at where they are on their spiritual journey. That's principle 8. This principle 9 then is the communication principle. This is so practical. It's basically the whole 2 pages, well, it's a page and a half, are really communication reminders. He says the communication principle is be clear, concise, open, and honest. It's an art. And these are some of the things that he has learned along the way. Let others talk, avoid arguments, don't complain. And he goes on and on with a long list. Make a point to remember people's names. It's music to their ears. Talk about yourself only if asked. Smile, it's contagious and opens people's hearts. Learn to listen. All kinds of great communication reminders. Challenge people gently. Talk open, or talk about your own failures. And never pass up an opportunity to speak a word of kindness or a word of appreciation to somebody else. And he ends that section by saying there are 6 billion people on the planet, and 5.9 billion of them go to bed every night starving for one honest word of appreciation. And that takes us to principle number 10, which is appropriately called the final principle. And I love this one. It's basically never give up. One of my professors described a friend of his who was also a professor, and this professor would write my professor, and he would sign off on his cards that he would send to him by saying, keep going, which is what the Apostle Paul, in different words, often said to his churches that he was writing, keep going. And through good times, through bad times, we all go through difficult seasons. He says, keep going. And that professor used to write him, and he said that, my professor said that was so encouraging to be reminded that it's hard, but keep moving forward, keep going. And so I will often say that to people today. And he closes this section by using the example of Abraham Lincoln. I had never seen it spelled out before. I really encourage you to pick up this book and read this final principle, where he lays out the failures of Abraham Lincoln. And of course, finally, he ends that section. It's one failure after another. It's so striking. And he ends the section by saying about Abraham Lincoln, he won the presidency and went on to become one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States and one of the finest models of leadership in modern times. In a speech, Lincoln said, the path was worn and slippery. My foot slipped from under me, knocking the other out of the way. but I recovered and said to myself, it's a slip, not a fall. It's awesome. If you've never read this before, man, it might be worth the price of the book just to read that 10th principle in terms of the life of Abraham Lincoln. And then he ends that section with a quote from Michael Jordan that says, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. Think about this, Michael Jordan. I've lost more than 300 games, and 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. Throughout my life and career, I've failed and failed and failed again. And that's why I succeed. Keep going. So again, the premise of the last video and this one is just to briefly overview these 10 principles from Matthew Kelly's book, The Rhythm of Life. I hope that you pick it up, and I hope that I've enticed you to do that. It is really, really inspiring. He's a good writer, and I'm really enjoying this and recommending it. So thanks for joining me today. Hopefully, and Nathan, I believe, will be back next time. And then we're coming to the end. We have one more part 7, and then we'll be done with the rhythm of life. So if you are looking for a Christian recovery group, I encourage you to check out Celebrate Recovery here on Monday nights at Christ Community Church. Dinners at 6, meetings at 7, open share groups at 8 o'clock. You are always welcome. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.